Hello and welcome to today's thinkTALK series on mental strategy, building high-performing teams. Now, ladies and gentlemen, without further ado, let's welcome our moderator for today, Cheryl Tan. Cheryl is the founder of the Breathe Movement and the Singapore Mental Health Film Festival, a TEDx speaker, an Obama Leader Asia Pacific 2019, and an American Express Leadership Academy alumna. Now over to you, Cheryl.
Thank you, Ina, for the introduction. Good afternoon, everyone. So we are here today to speak about building high-performing teams while taking into account the mental health of our team workers as well as our employees. So the World Health Organization really describes work-related stress as the response people may have when presented with work demands and pressures that may not quite match up to their abilities and their knowledge, which then challenges their ability to cope. This could also occur when they have little control over work processes and minimal support from supervisors and their coworkers. So today we have three wonderful speakers with us who work closely with individuals and organizations on a global level to promote better mental health practices and strategies at the workplace. First up, we have Azran Osman-Rani, the CEO and co-founder of Naluri in Malaysia. Naluri is a digital behavioral health startup that addresses mental health and chronic diseases together from a preventive, holistic, and outcome-based approach. Second, we have Kat Triviño, co-founder and chief product and data officer of MindNation in the Philippines. MindNation is an innovative mental health and well-being organization that provides holistic and needs-based mental health programs to individuals and work teams. And lastly, we have Jason Schie, a registered psychologist and founder of FlourishDx in Australia, where he helps organizations understand and apply psychological health and safety to prevent psychological injuries and promote employee well-being. A very warm welcome to all our three speakers this afternoon. So to start off our discussion, I'd like to welcome each of our speakers to give a 5-minute spiel on their thoughts on building high-performing teams with the incorporation of mental health strategies at a workplace. So Azran, if you could start us off.
Thank you very much, Cheryl, and thank you for having me. I started Naluri back in 2017, and I know this is the third venture that I've built. And first, as founders, we probably go through 3 times the rate of depression and anxiety as other employees. But I was inspired because back then I had lost my father to diabetes and cancer. And what I noticed was that the traditional healthcare system was only focused on his physical health, right? Take this medication, do this surgery, chemotherapy, radiotherapy. But when someone is going through a chronic condition like diabetes or cancer, inevitably what we now know was the enveloping depression and anxiety that he struggled with. And when that is not identified, supported, and treated, it led to skip chemo sessions, missed medications, and things progressively spiral. So one issue that we have is that the traditional healthcare system is so siloed by specialization, and they miss out on the crucial link between physical and mental health. And I'll come back to that. The second part is that the traditional healthcare system for our employees is reactive. You wait until people are distressed or they're sick and you expect them to reach out for help. And that is why traditional mental health solutions like psychotherapy centers only have a take-up rate of only about 1 or 2%. We think it's time as employers, as leaders, for us to flip that model to its more predictive and preventive approach. And so what we do is we help organizations scan and quantify the prevalence rates of depression, anxiety, and stress among the workforce. And once you start to see the numbers, you can clearly see there are a lot of trends. There's a clear generational effect where people 20 to 29 have between 40 to 79% higher levels of depression and anxiety compared to the older Gen X above 40s. There's also some slight gender differences and there's some geographic differences and by job functions as well. And this allows organizations to create more targeted programs and interventions earlier on, right? You don't want to wait until someone is distressed. But even if someone today is mentally healthy, we can create programs that build positive mental health, right? To be more resilient and focused and optimistic and curious rather than left unsupported. Stress ultimately progresses towards depression, anxiety, burnout. So the other part that I touched on earlier was that link between physical and mental health. And one interesting fact, as we took this quantitative data-driven approach, we did see that big 40 to 50% spike during the 2021 COVID period. And as 2022 changed and employers brought employees back into the office, they realized that they wanted to assess diabetes and hypertension risk. Because if you had diabetes and hypertension, you're more likely to be hospitalized or you need more days off if or when you contract COVID. And as we started to do a lot of these blood tests, we saw very clearly that those who were or who had depression and anxiety in 2021 were developing diabetes and hypertension at rates that you would expect them to get only 10 years later. So COVID has accelerated, this chronic disease time bomb, because when you're isolated, you lead a sedentary life, you are you're probably eating unhealthily, right? And that affects your blood sugar. It constricts your blood vessels, leads to high blood pressure, and ultimately chronic diseases. That is why I think, as we think about the health of our employee workforce, it is our job to support them in this holistic way, because the old model was, I don't care what you do at home. I don't care about your health. Just come to the office and work. Well, in today's world, we live in a 24/7 connected world, right? And as employers and leaders, it is our job to create a culture where people, first of all, are aware that health affects performance at work, that we create a culture of, that is open to talk about it and provide services so that employees can get the support that they need earlier on. And not wait until they're distressed. So that's a little bit about what I do, and I look forward to an engaging discussion with my panelists today.
Thank you so much, Azran, for sharing a bit more about the work that you do. Next up, we have Kat, who will be sharing her 5-minute spell.
Thank you so much for having me. Today, I'll actually be zeroing in on a very personal insight on our discussion. There may be some of us here that are in a managerial or staff level, and I want to share with you how we can also create impact when it comes to your mental health as you grow in your organization. Azran shared some wonderful facts about the intersection as well of physical health and mental health, and how the pandemic has played a big role in our journey. Our studies in MindNation with thousands of Philippine survey respondents have allowed us to get a good glimpse of mental health in organizations. We measure impact to productivity, feeling of belongingness, trust. And from what we understand with mental health, it's determined by a complex interplay of individual, social, and structural stresses and vulnerabilities, and understanding the factors that are at play is essential to be able to address them head on. Mental health issues did not just start during the pandemic, as many may think. It has been a long global crisis that was magnified during the pandemic. In 2021, it was the leading source of mental health challenges. But as we ease in to the new normal, we're now seeing significant increases in personal and financial pressures as top sources, followed by work performance stress, balance with home responsibilities. Mental health severely impacts the bottom line, with companies losing trillions of dollars every year due to mental health concerns. But on an individual standpoint, individuals develop the physical manifestations of the issues, burnout, and it can take longer to do tasks. It can increase error, with thoughts of even ultimately leaving the organization. This is a reality that affects all employees, even high performers. I say this as someone who has experienced this firsthand. I was diagnosed in 2018 with severe clinical depression and anxiety. I had worked for over a decade in the corporate space with multinationals prior to pursuing purposeful work. with a startup full-time. I was a high-performing marketer and a public speaker. My battle with depression also almost cost me my life. I always get asked about the source of my depression and anxiety. It was particularly hard to even share it with the organization I was working for at the time, when I was made to explain about why I had been frequently tardy or absent with little to no interest in the things that I do. It's something that I used to be so passionate about. At the time, I couldn't even understand what was happening. I loved work. I loved where I was heading, but I felt completely lost. For most, we cannot pin our mental health concerns to one event or source. It is, again, complex. It was the scripts and the beliefs that I had growing up that made me unable to set boundaries. It was the environment and the work that valued output and sacrifice over rest and well-being to grow. And it was ultimately getting lost in a system and a path that didn't allow me to explore and gave me the most purpose. These all seem like very personal issues, you might think. Valuing employees should be deeper than calling teams family. I started therapy shortly that year, encouraged by my friends who have also done the same before, and learned so much, not only about myself, but about the science behind everyday shared mental health experiences like stress, people-pleasing, perfectionism, and burnout. My experience in seeking mental health care that I needed was not easy. It was not part at that time of the usual employee assistance program, not part of healthcare benefits. It was heavily stigmatized, that it even impacted how leaders in the organization saw my potential and my capacity, with them eventually even asking the big question, maybe HR should review if this is still the career and the position for you. Part of my healing was being able to dig deep in this experience with the understanding that I was not alone. 2 in 5 employees experience mental health concerns, and many would find such benefit in being able to understand the value of mental health and how normal it is to feel emotions that would otherwise be perceived as weak, too soft, or maybe even extreme. I started MindNation and began advocating well-being in the years that followed. Therapy had helped me greatly regain my self-worth and my work through internal challenges so that I can improve everything that was external. It helped so much that I was surrounded by the support I needed, and it has given me a big capacity, more capacity and alignment. Leaders need to advocate for good mental health with their teams. We need to provide the tools, like Azran said, the awareness around mental health, and encourage strengthening self-worth to develop more resilient employees and generations of more empathic, innovative, and collaborative leaders. And as for employees, it doesn't always mean leaving work to pursue your passion. It's normal to not always have to love your job. It's normal and okay to simply need to put food on the table or find that stability. But those reasons shouldn't be at the cost of your health. You don't need to be in severe distress to go to a therapist. They can help you define just that, help you with the tools that you need to best drive where your boundaries are. Our workplace and our leaders are big parts of the equation to solving the mental health concern and the culture as a whole. But we also have to take accountability and put into equation what we can individually own ourselves. No matter what workplace or organization I change, whatever leaders change, if we never take accountability to drive our own internal change, the patterns will still continue over and over again. Your voice and your individual actions make such a huge difference, and you're worthy of good well-being, and you deserve the space that cultivates that. Excited to also learn more from our fellow panelists and continue with the discussion.
Thank you so much, Kat. And thank you for sharing your story as well. Jason, we will hear from you next.
Thanks, Cheryl. And again, thanks for including me in this panel. So I guess, I'm probably coming from the future for many people here. I'm from Australia, as you can probably get from my accent. And I got to say that compared to what is happening in Asia and other parts of the world, we definitely are nowhere near having this solved. But I'd say the discussion has been going for longer than in certain parts of the world. And really what we're seeing here in Australia is that we've been trying out all of the traditional approaches to mental health in the workplace. And when I say traditional, a lot of the focus has been on stigma reduction, providing care to people who are distressed through things like employee assistance programs. We have now also started to extend into how do we actually promote wellbeing using tools like mindfulness or resilience training. And what we're finding in Australia is that these things don't actually work to move the needle in terms of population mental health outcomes. In Australia, we have an alarming trend of people who are getting ill because of work. Not ill at work or what they're bringing to work, it is because of work. So in Australia, for example, we have a workers' compensation scheme where if you have an injury or an illness caused by work, the insurer will pay for your recovery and time out of work. In Australia, 10% of all injury claims are actually due to psychological injuries. So these are things that the company should have actually prevented from occurring. It was within their control, but led to, because they didn't control it properly, an employee was injured. The problem with this is not just the moral issue associated with making people psychologically unwell because of the work that we're asking people to do, but these things are hugely complicated issues generally. And now the median time that people spend off work after having a psychological injury in Australia is more than half a year, compared to the typical physical injury claim, which is about a quarter of that amount of time off work. These psychological claims tend to be a lot more complex. That trend is alarming. Like I said, it's up 73%, the number of claims that we've had over the last 5 years. It was bad before COVID. It was trending up before COVID. This is not because of COVID, but what COVID has done is really made us more attuned to the role work is playing in people's mental health. It's not just, the case in Australia. In the UK, for example, they have self-report data they collect every year through something called the Labour Force Survey. In the last reporting period, this is post-COVID, they had 17 million days lost due to illness or injury. 46% of those was due to work-related, not home-related, work-related stress, depression, or anxiety. So this is causing a huge impact on workplaces. So what we're finding, it's a discovery here in Australia, but now is permeating through groups like the World Health Organization and International Labour Organization, is that just purely focusing on reactive treatment when people are already unwell, or focusing on wellbeing initiatives like resilience training or mindfulness, they're not enough. What we also need to consider is what are the modifiable aspects of work and the systemic things that we can do to improve the experience of work in order to reduce foreseeable harm from occurring. In Australia, we are now going through a period of regulatory reform where we are elevating psychological health and safety to the same level as physical health and safety. And employers are being held to account when they fail to identify reasonable foreseeable risks to people's mental health and putting in controls to make sure that people aren't unnecessarily harmed. Internationally, there is an ISO 45003 standard out now for psychological health and safety in the workplace, and the big focus is on risk management and not focusing at the individual level of intervention. It's focusing on what can we do to design work better so that people aren't ill or don't become ill. But really, it's not a standalone thing. No mental health intervention should be, because what we're talking about is a really complicated issue. But we really should be taking what's known as an integrated approach. And that's looking at primary, secondary, and tertiary levels of prevention. What are we doing to support those employees who do become unwell? What are the resources that we have to help them practice better self-care and optimize well-being? But the missing piece for many, even in advanced markets like Australia, is that prevent harm piece. And so, hopefully I'll be able to share some of my insights working through FlourishDx and how we're supporting organisations to take more of a risk management approach to supplement the other activities they're doing to support the mental health of workers.
Thank you so much, Jason. Well, thank you to our three speakers for sharing a bit more about their thoughts on how can we build high-performing teams. I hear from the three of you that having an integrative approach, a holistic approach to working in this to building better business strategies and is crucial right now. With mental health awareness being on the high still right now, especially ever since COVID happened, what do you think are the contributing factors to organizations not wanting to pick up on having such integrative approaches or preventive measures in the workplace? Azran, would you like to go for it first? You're unmuted.
Sure. Okay. Well, I think number one, I'm very encouraged that a lot of organizations do now realize, especially after the pandemic, the importance of addressing this issue strategically. So it's no longer just an HR issue or an employee benefits issue, but it is a CEO level issue. And so while, obviously there may still be, a lot of employers, especially in the small and medium enterprise market, where they might be constrained by budget, right? And the challenge here in Southeast Asia is a lot of these preventive and mental health programs today are not covered by standard health insurance programs or products that employers sign up to. But that's changing, right? And so we're playing a role in building the data sets to enable insurers to create actuarial models to price the risk of mental health, right? Not just the prevalence, but how much improvement you can see and what's the value of that improvement, right? And so there's been a lot of growing, movement in that sense. I'm also encouraged that the younger generation are a lot less stigmatized, right? So when we do big kickoffs, the older generation, might be hesitant to speak openly about mental health and pressure, but the younger ones are putting up and saying, I'm depressed, I need help in front of the CEO, right? And they demand and expect employers, to address that, right? And so, certainly in the last 3 years, a lot has changed. So I'm optimistic of the future.
Thank you, Jason. It's really good to hear optimism. I'm definitely, I think with the onset of a lot of data being collected in the past 2 years, I think a lot has been changing. Kat, would you like to chime in as well?
Yeah, I actually also personally love the optimism of Azran. But it's very true that especially as we began to ease in, like gotten out of lockdown, in the Philippines, for example, we have also been seeing a shift in priorities with both big and small organizations when it comes to the budget that they allocate for mental health care programs. And this is there's so many factors that contribute to this. A lot of them and a lot of big businesses were heavily impacted by the pandemic. And so it really it's not just layoffs that we're seeing. It's a lot of rethinking the budgets that they're putting in year on year, and also trying to measure that up to the targets that they're setting for that year and the years to come. And unfortunately, because they still do not see how and do not make this a strategic decision, like what Azran said, they don't see how this could heavily impact the bottom line, the output to business, and even the performance and the capacity and the resilience of their teams at work. Even if they did all they can to keep the employees, if they're not making an actual effort to invest in the support that's needed, they're going to eventually lose them, and the talents are going to quit. But from our studies also, and from the feedback that we're getting with the organizations that we have been working with and the studies that we've been doing, a big question for a lot of these organizations is on the utilization. It's great, and we are actually seeing big use and encouragement from the youth and new generations to actually take charge and use these support when they're available. But a big part of the employee workforce still feel uneasy, that it's still heavily stigmatized. They don't want to be talking about very personal issues and concerns at work. And it's just a chicken and egg kind of scenario where if nobody's using it, then why should we be investing in it? So great awareness needs to happen. We need to openly talk more about it. Leaders need to advocate it from a one-on-one and an organizational level.
Thank you, Kat. Yes, it's definitely a chicken and egg thing, isn't it? It's like I think everyone is saying that yes, definitely there are companies who are taking on mental health programs, but definitely I think Azran, you also mentioned that it's we cannot just take it on just at the very high of you feeling really stressed out. but it's also about how can we do more preventive, and like how do we support those who right now they probably they're not distressed or anything. How can we encourage employees to take on programs like that? And if any of you have an answer for that, I think that would be great as well. How do we, I think so much has been done in the past years to, destigmatize mental health in the workplace. But I think it's also a huge question on in the workplace, are there safe spaces? And I think, Kat, you shared a little bit about your experience. And Jason, you as a psychologist as well, working in FlourishDx. I wonder if you have any experience in helping companies create safe spaces, or what does it mean to create a safe space in a company where we can go in and talk not just about work, but I think we talk from a very holistic point of view. Individuals made up of family, their environment, and stuff like that. How can we bring all this into the workplace and ensure that there is safety measures in the workplace so a person can be vulnerable and still kept, accountable for their work and stuff?
Yeah, sure. And I think there's two things to explore here. One is we need leaders who are promoted into those positions because they're going to be good leaders. What we often see is that people are promoted based on technical competence. And they might be great technically, but they should no way be anywhere near leadership of a team. They lack basic levels of empathy and ability to listen and respond appropriately. And therefore, people aren't necessarily willing to share when things aren't going well. So we need to be recruiting the right people and then providing a lot of training and support to those people, not just saying you're now a leader. We expect you to be able to just know how to do it because you've been technically, proficient for a while. The second thing is I feel there's a really big difference between feeling safe to speak up and feeling heard. So many listeners maybe on the call today would have heard of a term called psychological safety. So that's about being able to bring your true self to work and being able to speak up without fear of repercussions, either personally or professionally. And that's all well and good to create an environment, and the leader often helps, is the main person responsible for developing that environment where people are willing to speak up. And in the case of mental health, maybe disclose when things aren't going so well, or if home life is affecting work life. But unless there's actual systems and action that is in place to be able to support those employees once they've taken that brave step to speak up, people are going to get quiet very quickly when they realize, my company's, saying that they don't want to have a stigma around mental health. They want people to talk about mental ill health. But I went and spoke up and actually nothing changed. There was no support given. There were no accommodations made in my work, despite, me taking that step. So I did a LinkedIn post recently about the difference between feeling safe to speak up versus feeling heard. And whilst there's some really great information out there led by the likes of Amy Edmondson on what are the behaviours that leaders can use to make this psychologically safe environment, to make an environment where people feel heard, we need line managers and broader systems that are able to adapt and support individuals when they have made that brave step to step up. And then we need to provide accommodations. If people are saying that they're getting challenged because, their kids are sick, or, they've got an elderly parent that they have to give support to, what are the accommodations that are reasonable that the organisation can make, knowing that that person's going through a difficult time? So yes, unless we have those supports to make people feel heard by actioning when they speak up, be prepared not to be doing anything meaningful in the mental health space.
Thank you, Jason. There's a question that just came in. I think I have to read the whole question because it's pretty long. I cannot summarize so fast. How can prioritizing mental health contribute to the success of a 40-year-old mom and wife in a professional endeavors, especially when slacking at work is not an option because you are competing with younger, enthusiastic coworkers? Right. Okay. So I guess this person is asking, how can you find that boundary, or how can you find that personal safety net still when you are juggling so many different roles? In the workplace, you're not allowed to slack off. I think this ties in a little bit with what Jason said. It is like at the workplace, it's very hard to kind of bring in different kind of thoughts and if you don't have that safety net. I wonder if does anybody, Jason, would you like to answer to this question? How do you think prioritizing mental health?
Yeah, I know Kat wants to jump in just very quickly though, Kat. Yeah, so this it comes back down to actually treating this as a system level issue and making sure that we have the systems in place first. It's not just enough to say, oh, we want our leaders to, tell people to speak up and prioritize their mental health, unless the organization, first of all, has structures in place to actually make this a reality. And if we recognize that, people middle age, and I class myself in that middle age mark too, we have experiences that the younger people can't have. But if we're not providing suitable accommodations for people in that middle age bracket, and I've got 3 young kids myself, and they're a drain on my energy and make it hard for me to practice self-care as well, what are the accommodations for those people? But it's a system level issue. We can't just say it's your responsibility to deal with everything you have at home. We value you, but don't bring your personal life to home life. To work, it will have an impact, and we need to be making the right accommodations. But I just don't see many organisations having the right systems to support that yet. They're on the way.
I'll really good to hear that these systems are on the way, and I think with all the data that all of you are pushing out, hopefully the on the way will be on a fast track. Sorry, Kat.
Thank you. And thank you, Jason. You know what I found actually interesting with this question is that the one who's asking is relating prioritizing mental health to slacking off at work, as if that is the option in prioritizing mental health, when it should not be. That's not supposed to be part of the discussion. Slacking off may be something that you think or you're describing as rest or taking a priority or setting boundaries, but it's not. That's something that internally we also have to be able to manage and work through with a therapist. And also part of the organization's role also to communicate that and to actively advocate for it, that it's okay to set boundaries. It's okay to talk about what works for you, because each individual, from parents in the workforce to those that are just starting a family and those that are just starting with their careers, they all have very different mental health concerns. They all have very different needs that organizations need to be able to understand and have the systems in place, like what Jason said, to be able to support them wherever they're at. But prioritizing mental health can contribute to the success of anyone, whether you're 1920s to starting your job, or you're 40, 50, or a senior C-suite role, by being able to also share and show to the younger generations how you're prioritizing your mental health contributes to the culture of creating safe spaces at work. And it shows more positive outcomes in terms of how we relate to others and how we eventually do our work as well.
Cheryl, can I chime in as well? Because I definitely want to build on Kat's very important point that mental health is not a passive thing like rest. It is an active and deliberate process to be able to handle, cope, and even thrive under stress and pressure. So one of the coaching models that we use is our think model, THINK, to teach people to first take control, being able to focus on the things that you can control and learning to not be overwhelmed by the factors that are out of your control, whether it's bosses, investors, sales. H is about maintaining a hopeful outlook, because our brains have a tendency to think about the worst case scenario. So there are very deliberate visualization techniques to learn to focus on a positive outcome. I is about informed actions, learning how to respond intentionally, especially under threat and pressure, instead of reacting impulsively. So if you're not mentally fit, you tend to be reacting impulsively. N is about nurturing ourselves and nurturing our network. That also has to be deliberate, right? And it's not a passive part, whether it's about sleep, whether it's about support systems, whether it's about breathing techniques. And finally, K, knowing your goals. We always have to remind ourselves both what are the longer and short-term goals in the roles that we have and translate that into our daily behavior. So that's one example of, a structured program that can help someone handle what might seem like overwhelming stress and pressure.
Thank you, Azran. Thank you, Kat. And I really like your think model as well. It really talks about what the individual can do, because a lot of things can be outside of our control. One of the participants asked about whether the speakers can expand on how leaders and businesses can build positive environments. I think one of you earlier said something about leaders are being promoted because of competence, and not so much on whether you're a good listener or you're empathetic and stuff like that. So how can we build a business juggling the profitability, the economic whole thing of the business, while at the same time taking into account the emotions and the mental health of everyone in the workplace? Is this something that is, how do we really juggle everything and still keep the profits up high? If Azran, you're nodding and
Sure.
would like to answer?
Just very quickly, one analogy, I'm not saying this is the only analogy, is with professional sports teams, right? If you're a manager and you're managing high performance athletes, you don't want all your athletes to be just going all out every single game for the whole season. They're going to get burnt out. They're going to be underperforming. So the key thing is, how do we learn to move from managing time to managing energy, right? Time is a finite resource, but first understanding energy levels in our workforce, creating means for energy to be recharged and rejuvenated so that people can actually perform more. Because when you're recharged, you get a task done in 1 hour, but when you're feeling overwhelmed, it's going to take you 4 hours to complete that same task, and it probably at a lower quality. So the mindset of leaders of moving from simply managing employees' time to managing employees' energy levels is a big breakthrough, I think, that can really shift the needle.
Thank you, Azran. I definitely do hear moving from time to energy. I think it's a huge shift as well. I mean, due to the pandemic, I think we heard a lot of people working from home globally and unable to even have lunchtime and stuff like that. Because what used to be, I walk to the cafeteria and stuff like that. Suddenly I'm eating lunch in front of my screen and then have back-to-back Zoom meetings, and I'm unable to find time off. So, I think it's very interesting now that we are also working from home. A lot of individuals are, even though they get to stay at home, they lessen their commute time, but then employees see that, oh, you have more time on your hands, therefore you can perhaps be more productive. So maybe we can address a little bit about this whole working from home thing and how we can better manage our boundaries, and how can team leaders and businesses help employees manage their energy levels while working at home and not be, know how to put a stop to emails and calls and stuff like that. Jason, would you have an idea?
Yeah, I think it's worthwhile reflecting on, do employees need to be contacted outside of work hours? And if they don't, then what access to technology are we providing them after work hours? So if they don't have access to Teams after work hours, or if they can put themselves on Do Not Disturb for outside of work hours, terrific. If they don't have a mobile phone, with things like Teams and Zoom these days, most remote employees actually don't need to be contactable by phone. What are the barriers that we can put in place to be able to protect the time that should be sacred? But I really love Azran's point about energy management as well. if we allow or give our employees, particularly knowledge workers, this works for, right? Factory workers, where they have to be present at the facility to work, it doesn't work as well. But if you're working from home, then, allow employees where possible to have that autonomy to choose when they work. Because you're going to have some people who like to get up early in the morning and find they can be really productive. There's going to be some that like to work late into the evening. So if we allow them to practice energy management rather than time management, you'll find that they're actually going to choose the times where they're probably going to be more productive anyway, and choose those times for work, and therefore be able to contribute. And I push back on that idea that, promoting mental health comes at the expense of business profitability and success. When we prioritize mental health, generally we get better productivity engagement from workers. We get greater retention because it's very expensive to rehire and retrain workers. There's all these benefits when we make, sometimes very simple and cost-effective accommodations for employees. There's a lot of business benefits for that. But I digress.
Now, definitely hear that when we do prioritize mental health, the productivity does go up. Energy levels are better managed. There's a question that came in that kind of ties in a little bit to what we're speaking about. How do we maintain mental health in the lesser developed countries, and especially countries that are facing financial crisis, where organizations themselves are, they have a shortage of resources. So we see this definitely in a lot of startups, and so I think all three of our speakers are founders or co-founders. So, but the question is really about those in the least developed countries as well. So I wonder, Kat, would you like to give a go at this first?
Actually, this is something that we talked about in the previous question as well, when we were talking about the factors that are stopping a lot of organizations from employing mental health programs within their companies. It's a factor definitely that the economic and the shortages of resources play in being able to put in and prioritize mental health for their employees. And when we talk about being able to maintain mental health, what we usually communicate, of course, it's it kind of, I don't want to think of it so much as a business, but it really definitely is something that I personally advocate for, is that you don't have to have a complex, holistic program just yet if you don't have the resources, but you can start with taking small and intentional steps towards that. Start by simply asking questions. If you're a small organization, asking questions, reaching out, conducting one-on-ones that are not about project management. It's not a list of to-dos that you have to do, but simply asking them how they're doing. That already greatly improves and helps support the trust that they have with the organization, and understanding that, okay, my employer, my manager believes and understands me and understands where I'm at. And being able to respect the boundaries that these employers are being set. There's no cost to that whatsoever. But by advocating and respecting those boundaries, we're able to establish and cultivate a culture that ultimately cares for their teams at no cost. In fact, like what Jason had mentioned, it will actually further support how productive and how supportive they are within the organization, how aligned they are to the values that you have as well. An interesting thing on boundaries, and I'd like to just input that as well in the topic of working from home. The pandemic has greatly highlighted boundaries. If you have or if you don't have them, more people that are willing to just take on the back-to-back stuff, and we're all very guilty of it. We're not being able to say no because we feel the guilt of just having all the perceived time in the world, is a showcase of our own boundaries and our own respect of our energy. And so if you don't have a healthy set of boundaries, it highlights that and it affects how you work in this new way of working. So when we communicate and when we talk about boundaries, it's not a rule. It's not about putting out to the whole organization, okay, by 6 p.m., absolutely no emails. That's a rule. Boundaries are more customized and more personalized as well. You can send emails. You can respond or work at midnight if you want to. There are organ leaders and there are employees who like working during those times. But boundaries is about being able to communicate that, okay, if you do send an email midnight or if you do send me a text message at midnight, I will respond at this time. And being able to respect and make the employees feel that that's okay.
Thank you, Kat. Boundaries is also something that is really, I think it's a very interesting subject. And most definitely, I think the pandemic has increased our awareness of it. I think we shouldn't go to another question. I think we should expand a bit more about this. But I think for boundaries, I think the other thing is what happens if you are in a team and, your team leader clearly does not respect your boundaries. So that's a whole other issue as well. We can chat a bit about that, but Azran, do you have anything to add on to what Kat said about companies that are facing, they are not so developed and have shortage of manpower, and how can we still maintain good mental health practices?
So first, today with digital, we've brought down the cost of professional mental health care to less than the cost of an annual subscription for Slack or for, Google G Suite that typically, startups would even invest in because it's a massive productivity gain for employees, right? Now, take a market like Indonesia, right? Where, so it's not the least developed, but it's in a developing category. When someone is in a distressed state, right? Even put aside hospitalization costs, just the cost of absenteeism, number of days sick leave, and presenteeism, where they're coming to work, but they're not productive, that is in the order of about $1,000 to $2,000 a year per employee, right? And what we've seen is when organizations prioritize care, right, that give people the support that they need, you can bring that number down to about $500 to $800, which means you could be saving between $500 to $1,000 a year in productivity gains. Now, the cost of that care is under $100 a year for an employee, right? Maybe it's even closer to $50 a year. That's a very material ROI. And that's the language that CEOs and CFOs finally get it, right? This is not an abstraction. This is not a nice to have. It has real bottom line impact.
Thank you, Azran. Jason, do you have anything to add before we move to? Okay, thank you. So, with all this knowledge and everything that's out there, and I think Kat also mentioned is a chicken and egg problem at where we are at right now. There might be services out there that companies are providing, but then employees are not making use of it. So, why? So to cut all the losses and everything, I will not have any of these services at all. So then for companies to realize that, especially I think with whatever size company you are at, how do you convince the business leaders that it's a long process, that mental health isn't just within 1 month I can find something, I can find a quantitative gain, or in 3 months. It takes years probably to see the effect of having such preventive measures coming in. So how can we convince business leaders that right now is the time to invest, so that for 5 years down the road, 10 years down the road, you will see it come into effect? Sorry, I keep forgetting. Jason, would you like to speak a bit more about this?
Yeah, I think it's probably good to look at countries like Australia, where we are maybe a few years ahead, and go, well, this is coming down the line for countries in Asia, Southeast Asia, but really kind of build on what these executives might be familiar with, whether it's a quality management system or an information security management system, understanding that these things, are not easy problems that are solved overnight, but by setting up a good system, which, is about continuous improvement, not trying to become the most mentally healthy organisation overnight by putting in systems and continuously improving, that we're going to see the benefits. And in the future, this will be a must-have. It is not it's not going to be a nice-to-have. Employees, where they have the opportunities, and I understand that not everyone in every market has has the same opportunities that we are privileged to have in Australia, but they're going to vote with their feet. And they're going to leave to the organisation that is looking after the well-being of their employees rather than hurting it. I think if we can kind of go, well, this is kind of going to be not a nice to have, but a business imperative and a way to remain competitive. But we need to put in systems and understand, like a quality management system, it's going to take a while to set up, and then we're going to, tackle the low-hanging fruit one bite at a time rather than trying to do everything all. I think those things are important.
Thank you, Jason. I do wonder, and you said a little bit about how, countries can look to Australia for sort of guidance and stuff. I do wonder, we have our speakers from Malaysia and the Philippines. I wonder whether cultural values as well come into play when we talk about the Southeast Asian countries, and why is it that is it hard then to talk about something about equality management systems and things like that in the Asian context? Kat, would you like to? Oh, Azran, would you like to go?
No,
first?
I'm going to let Kat go first.
Yeah, I can start on this because what we're noticing that is a big factor in the stigma surrounding mental health. And like I said, like when I got diagnosed with depression in 2018, it was still something that was heavily not talked about in the workplace and even at home, was because of the fact that in the Philippines, we're a highly religious focused country, and also we're very much centered on family. And those two things can be positives, but they can also negate a lot of the ideas and beliefs when it comes to mental health and the control that we can have. We always, some would, and especially those that are in less developed communities, would rely simply on, okay, maybe I should just pray more to let go of all these negative things. They relate depression and anxiety as to something that is evil. And even with family, while this is something that is very helpful, it is the basic unit of society that we are able to find support with our families. A lot of these people, our loved ones, they don't have the right tools or the right equipment to be able to help you with your mental health concerns, especially the most severe concerns. They may be encouraging or even downplaying experiences that you're feeling. And this trickles down also to the beliefs that come into the workplace as well. So while the values at work can reflect on what's happening also within the country. So those things are things that we're trying to be careful of when we're talking about mental health in the country, that do not negate or dismiss the realities and the truth of the community and the country being really highly religious and highly centered and focused on family, but using those as ways that we can amplify the message further.
So Cheryl, what's Malaysia #1 in the world at? I can tell you it is not sports. Philippines, you've got an Olympic gold medal. Singapore, you've got an Olympic gold medal. Australia eats gold medals for breakfast. The one thing Malaysia is #1 in the world, and you can Google this, is the power distance index. We're such a hierarchical society that, we do not have a culture where younger employees will speak up either with ideas or problems to their bosses voluntarily. In that culture, it is imperative for leaders to go, you can't just say, I've got an open door policy, come to me if you got a problem. They're not going to come to you. You can't say, management by walkabout, how's everything today, Kat? Good. Even though she might have a lot of issues and frustrations she's holding back. If you have a town hall, anyone's got questions, no one's going to speak up. So we can't, kind of just say, well, that's my job as a leader, right? You got to find ways to kind of reach out and, provide confidential resources, forums, support groups within the companies to address this very critical power distance gap that's very unique in a lot of Asian cultures.
Thank you. I most definitely did not know about what Malaysia is known for. Thank you for sharing that. I wonder if any of you have any companies in mind that, as best case practices, or someone like, companies that you work with that have managed to navigate the power distance index, that the leaders have shown great strength in being able to reach down to their employees and creating that very safe workspace in Malaysia or anywhere in Asia.
The one thing we encourage our leaders to do is to be vulnerable, because you can't just be the strong one that says, guys, if you got a problem, come to me. No one's going to come to you. But if you start by role modeling it, that says, you know what, guys, I don't know. I'm under pressure. Here's how I'm getting help. You start to create a culture where people might be more willing to come to you, or at least create a culture where we talk about it. It is our job as leaders to role model vulnerability and create that safe space.
Thank you so much. And I think this goes back a little bit to what Kat said, that everyone needs to be accountable. And it's really about caring for ourselves and building that self-awareness as leaders. And then hopefully as we get promoted, leaders will be empathetic, like what Jason said, not just competing at a job, but also being able to listen. We are about closing into 3 o'clock. I'd like to ask one last question to all our three speakers. I think asking when we spoke to organizers, I asked who the target audience is, and I think we have individuals from all levels of management here. So in a minute or less, could each of you provide an actionable strategy that individuals can take on right now to better support their mental health for themselves and their teams at the workplace?
Well, I am an advocate of therapy, and something that we communicate often, and I communicate often as well, is that you don't need to be facing extreme distress and diagnosed for you to be seeking out help. Normalizing speaking to a professional, just checking in where you're at, and will help you understand what issues need to be addressed, how you can better cope with scenarios when they come or as they come. And by understanding and by seeking the help of a professional, you're able to also understand as well how you can better set the boundaries, how you can communicate them, how you can work through things like trauma. And trauma doesn't even have to be a big, extreme life event. It can be little things like they call it complex PTSD that accumulate over time. And by being able to work on that with a professional and understand where your traumas lie, what's causing the distress, how you're reacting towards challenges in the workplace and at home, and your relationships with others can be big help for you to be more resilient in the future. By also actively communicating with your leaders. I know a lot of us, and we see here that in Malaysia, and this is the same with the Philippines, we're overcome by shame about not talking about our own mental health because they are extremely personal issues, especially when it's linked to things like family or marriage or relationship problems or even financial problems. I don't want to be talking about this with my boss. They don't have to do anything about it. I feel like I might be judged. But by being able to do that, being open to do that, regardless of whether they accept it or they don't, or they do something or not, it helps you also create that space for yourself, that this is something that I am working on. You're accountable for it, and by recognizing it, you're able to take action and recognize the next steps.
Thank you, Kat. Azran, would you like to give?
Maybe as a quick compliment to Kat's therapy, peer support networks. Not all friends and family members are actually good and positive for us, right? We need to proactively find people, peers in our group that will listen to us, that give us that space, not quick to judge us, and also not quick to just tell us what to do. Right, that's been my bedrock over the last decade in my entrepreneurial journey. The power of building peer support networks.
Thank you, Azran. Jason.
Yeah, I'd say if you're interested in this area, continue to educate yourself. So attend webinars like this, obviously. We also have, we're trying to educate people more on how do you take more of a work design approach and a risk-based lens to the psychosocial factors in the workplace. So there's free resources that we've put online, like the 45003 Academy, which is based on ISO 45003. Free e-learning on there and the website's 45003.org. We also do a weekly podcast, Psych Health and Safety podcast with guests from all around the world, including parts of Asia in there as well. So definitely, continue to educate yourself and consider, beyond just the familiar tertiary level interventions, what are you doing to, prevent harm and promote flourishing as well at work?
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Jason, Azran, and Kat. I think we definitely have learned a lot today about the need to build boundaries, to have a peer support system, and to continually educate ourselves as to what are the best case practices out there. How can we better support ourselves and our teams at the workplace? And today we also talked a lot about, to build high performing teams. It's so much about moving away from reactive treatment. And how can we have targeted programs very early on so that we can better support our employees? We do have a few questions that are in the Q&A, and the organizers will be answering. They will be posting this on their, I think, social media platforms after this is done. So we will get to them. Our speakers will get to them after. So we are just 3 minutes after 3. So thank you so much for joining all of us today. Thank you to my 3 panelists as well. And thank you so much for having us here today.
Thank you to all the speakers and all attendees for being here today and making this webinar a success. Unfortunately, that's all the time we have for today. We truly hope that you have gained valuable inputs and ideas. Now, on behalf of WIEF Foundation, thank you for joining us today. Stay safe and have a great day ahead.